In the Japanese religion of Shinto, there is a god or kami for almost all aspects of life, be it elements, surroundings, objects, or activities. Amaterasu is the goddess of the sun who gave the Japanese imperial family their right to rule. Hachiman is the god of war, worshipped by the samurai, and Tenjin is the kami of poetry and scholarship, who is venerated by the learning and the learned. And Karl Gotch is the kami, the god of wrestling. From a turbulent childhood in war-ravaged Europe to the bright lights of Madison Square Garden, the 1948 Olympics to the ground floor of modern mixed martial arts, Karl Gotch's name resounds with influence, admiration, resentment, and worship in grappling gyms the world over. And today we talk about the life and legacy of that man, the man who is credited as the godfather of mixed martial arts, the god of wrestling, Karl Gotch. All right, gang, welcome back to Catch 22, a Catch Chronicles podcast, where we talk about the intersection of worked and shoot wrestling in 22 very drawn-out, dry episodes. I'm back here with my co-host, Javi, Coach Javi of the Grit and Growth MMA, and I've got Jimmy on the board back there.
What up, Jimmy?
What up, Jimmy? We're talking about Karl Gotch today. Karl Gotch, the wrestling god. Javi, what do you know about Karl Gotch?
Terrifying. I mean, that's the first thing that thinks like
that's fair.
He has this kind of aura of almost like supernatural. I think the god of, or the godfather of wrestling is
his term is actually the god of wrestling. That's
the god of wrestling.
I'd say calling him the godfather of MMA.
Sure,
is completely fair.
Okay,
completely fair. Super interesting guy. A lot of murkiness. A lot of murkiness as far as like what the real story is in certain parts of his life, or what kind of man he really was.
You're saying that this has been one of the most difficult people to research in all of it.
It's very difficult to research. Not a lot of material, especially not a lot of material in English. They did not have time to learn Japanese. I'm sorry, viewers and listeners. Did not have time to learn Japanese. It sounds interesting. But I didn't have time. So like the resources were quite limited, relying a lot on word of mouth from different people that knew him, little snippets of character profiling or of little bits of history that they were told or he told them. And then the work of Jake Shannon, which Jake Shannon's work with Karl wasn't like Billy Robinson. There's a book that I used from Jake Shannon to get a lot of stuff about Billy Robinson for last week's episode.
Yeah.
All we have really is stories Jake tells other people and one hour conversation called My Last Cigar with Karl, which
sounds heavy.
Was quite like, it's quite difficult to understand him on. It's poorly recorded. No offense, Jake. You're doing God's work for the wrestling community, but it's poorly recorded. The audio is bad. There is subtitles, but it's kind of hard to follow. And he's an old dude. He's not far from death. You know, the lucidity, he's fairly lucid, but it comes and goes the same way that it does for most old people.
Sure.
No offense, old people.
We love you.
Sorry, greatest generation. But there's consensuses that can be made about him.
Enough, you know.
There's enough that you know, and then, I mean, we're going to start with some of the kind of shady, is that true, is it not stuff, because we're going to, like, his childhood is really the hardest thing to nail down.
Okay.
He was born in 1924 in Antwerp, Belgium. But he was raised in Hamburg. His parents were of German and Hungarian heritage. And then as the Second World War kind of approaches, and as, you know, like National Socialism takes over Germany, it gets kind of harder to pin down. Like, there's stories about him and his family being in concentration camps, his father being in some sort of secret order of atheists that were being persecuted, losing family. And that's not something you want to downplay, especially if it's true.
Yeah.
But then there's also kind of stories and records of him, like, at the same time winning amateur wrestling championships.
Okay.
And being competitive. And the dates kind of conflict. So it's like, is he in a concentration camp,
or
is he just a German? Is he just a German guy?
Right.
And that's one of those things too that can be really chalked up in a lot of ways to just the way professional wrestling works, where like professional wrestling is all about blurring the lines and being like, there is no difference between the actor and the character. You are the character, like kayfabe, where it's like, maybe they said he was a concentration camp survivor as part of a gimmick at one point.
Or it tracks down like,
and maybe that, like, because of the nature of kayfabe, you keep that.
Kayfabe, sir.
Kayfabe is like the wrestling term for like making sure people know it's real or think it's real. Protecting the illusion is kayfabe. It's Pig Latin for fake, basically. You know what I mean?
Right. Making sure that people believe that.
Yeah, kayfabe is staying in character. So if we were talking about our match, in the hallway outside the locker room, and we saw Mark walk by, we saw some fan walk by, someone who's not in the business. I'll go, kayfabe. So anyway, you owe me $20.
Right.
We're not going to talk about, we're not going to expose anything anymore. So for lack of exposure, if they say, well, we think it's going to get you over to say you were in a concentration camp to get sympathy or something, maybe that just becomes part of it, and now people can't tell the difference. And maybe it's the other way. Maybe he was in a concentration camp, and they say, we don't want that sad story. So maybe we're just going to say you were out winning amateur championships for this whole time. So it's kind of hard. It's another just...
We're talking 100 years ago.
Yeah, and it's what makes wrestling so great, and it's also what makes it so frustrating sometimes.
Okay, yeah. What is truly real and what is...
Yeah, what's real, what's a work, where's the in-between? There's so many stories of people like the Wild Samoans, who are like the parents of like Roman Reigns, who's a big wrestling star now. These like, and their gimmick was that they were savages from Samoa. They like eat raw meat and stuff. You know what I mean? They had hits. Their heads were so thick, their skulls were so thick, you couldn't hit them in the head and hurt them.
Right.
If you headbutted a Samoan, you'd fall. Like you were done. That was the end of them. So they would get pulled over and they just refused to speak English to the cop.
Oh, wow.
Or like, yeah. Things like that.
Jesus.
And
so I have to assume that is part of this is a little bit off topic, but so if you have your personality, do they try to kind of mash it up a little bit with your, so you have your character, do they try to mash it up a little bit with your own personality, or is it like...
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. In general terms, it would be the most successful way to do it.
Okay.
Generally, like the best characters would be a wrestler who's just being themselves amped up to 12. Have you ever seen Curb Your Enthusiasm?
Yeah, a little bit, not much, a little bit.
Okay, well, Larry David's a huge asshole on it, right? He's just like an insufferable asshole.
Over the top.
And he's just acting like Larry David if Larry David had no social skills, right? That's the deal.
Sure. Okay.
It's like,
okay.
That's that far off. It's just like the difference between him being bearable and unbearable. Stone Cold Steve Austin. Is just being Steve Austin if Steve Austin had no social cues and no filter
and thousands of adoring fans.
Yeah, and like no limit on what he could be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The Rock is the same way. So that is the most successful way to do it. And I think that is pretty much how Karl Gotch was represented, because Karl Gotch didn't have a gimmick beyond the fact that he was an extremely strong and skilled and well-conditioned wrestler, which is why success was limited in certain areas. So in 48, he's already becoming a big wrestling star in Belgium and Germany. He's wrestling at the Hippodrome, which is like a big arena in Belgium. And he's on the Olympic wrestling team in 1948 for Belgium. He doesn't medal.
Okay.
But he's an Olympics level wrestler. He's training around the world. He's specifically in the Middle East and India. And he's picking up a lot of techniques from those guys, especially his conditioning techniques. So he's swinging the clubs. He's doing 1,000 Hindu squats a day, like squats, push-ups. These are things he does his whole life. He never stops. And he's a big barrel of a man.
Like, how tall is he again?
He's probably in the 6 to 6'2" region. Yeah. But he's solid. He's not he's not an athlete in the sense of what we call an athlete today, and like that super shredded. No. You know what I mean? Like, no, he's drinking a lot of milk. He's eating a lot of beef. And he's pretty much just doing body weight exercises.
Oh, that's really cool.
He's not a huge.
He does a lot of like isometrics
and like swinging. I'm sure he's doing a little bench press, curling some weights or something, but he's not Arnie.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
No one is.
So he's gaining quite a reputation, and while in Belgium, he becomes friends with Bob Robinson, an English catch wrestler from Wigan.
Oh, cool.
And this guy says, like, if you want to really learn to wrestle, if you want to be the best, you got to go to Wigan.
Yeah.
So he takes a trip over to Wigan, is immediately humbled, and stays there for several years.
And this is getting about that kind of 48, 50.
Yeah, this would probably be around 50.
Okay.
And I think he's there until like 56.
Jesus.
He's there for quite a while.
And I'm sorry, you got to give the guy respect. Someone who is walking around and crushing stuff and finds a place that he just gets humbled at and
sticks around.
You got to give him credit there.
That's a sign of a true competitor. Yeah, right? Like if you're willing to lose to get better.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be. No way.
Painfully, not just like they're not being nice.
Big sore. And also, you're in Billy Riley's gym.
Yeah,
you're helping to build Billy Riley's gym.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Because it's still here at this one. It has a good. Yeah, it has a pretty.
48 is, I think, the year it's built.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean. Right. So if he goes over in 50, he's running. He tells stories about, like, you know, helping to set up the plumbing.
Right. the little
like things like that. Putting the storm drains on it.
Right.
It's not like a easy life. It's not a pleasant place to be.
No.
So if you've got to really want to learn your craft to stick around there.
Yeah, that's.
So he starts traveling and wrestling professionally in the mid to late 50s.
Sure.
Because that's what you have to do. Again, we went over it in the Billy Robinson episode. You're not going to make any money.
Yeah.
You know,
like
even
musician or whatever. You have to tour.
The money is in this. It's not in, you know, the gravel pit matches with wagers, and it's not in winning medals. So he starts under the name Karl Krauser, and he's pretty successful. He's winning tournaments. He's definitely gaining a reputation for people that weren't already aware of him. He's now he's got like a real Greco-Roman pedigree. He's an Olympic Greco-Roman wrestler, so he can stand up and throw with you.
Yeah, with the best.
You don't stand much of a chance. And now he's learned hooking and shooting from the catch guys in Wigan, which makes him an extremely dangerous competitor, someone that you don't want to double cross. And one of the big problems with that is that he is an extremely dangerous, capable competitor that you don't want to cross, and he will cross you. He is not particularly interested in dealing with any showman. He doesn't really get it. There's something about Karl Gotch where he doesn't really get the point of professional wrestling, which is to make a bunch of money.
So he would just smash, you know, at a 7 when only a 3 was necessary to make it look.
Yeah, kind of like if he would refuse to lose sometimes.
Oh,
he would get really angry about the people he was losing.
Wow.
Too. Okay. And I think if you got in the ring, you had to earn a lot of respect with them.
Yeah.
Which is something that still happens, but not like this. You know what I mean? Like, you might see a veteran rough up a young guy or like sandbag him a little bit to kind of let him know who the boss is.
Sure.
But this is a little different. Like, I think he'd probably torture you if he could, if he got a hold of it. And a lot of those guys would. But Karl was about as capable as any of those guys were. And
torture.
This is a real problem when he goes to North America, because in North America, they're really getting away from it.
So this is all about the glam. This is all about
This is about making some money, making houses,
and fancier moves and everything. A lot more of the
slam bang Western style.
There we go.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, a lot of moves that don't really work.
Yeah,
fast paced things like the Irish Whip again, where like you throw a guy to the ropes. That's not how that works. You know what I mean? But it
bounces back.
But it sure does make the match exciting.
Yeah.
So he is brought over with Edouard Carpentier, who is a big star from France, like a world champion level big star who is very capable of putting on a show.
And
he's throwing drop kicks and flying head scissors. He's tanned. He's in shape. And he brings him over to Montreal with Eddie Quinn.
Oh, cool.
They're competing with Chicago at the time for like kind of TV dominance. I guess their TV stations are reaching each other. Quinn's trying to get into Chicago. And then he goes to Columbus with Al Haft, where he's wrestling under the name Young Gotch, which a lot of people did. So that's where the Karl Gotch name really comes from. But at the time, there were a lot of people that would be wrestling under the name Young Gotch, as a tribute to Frank Gotch. Frank Gotch, we're going to do an episode about. Frank Gotch is considered to be the best American catch wrestler of all time. Okay. And he was a champion in the 1900s, 1910s.
I think I might have confused these two names sometimes as I've just gone through.
I think you probably have. And it's there. That's why he's named that.
Oh.
Right? It's to kind of confusing to think, well, he must be a world champion guy. He's a Gotch. He's compared to Frank Gotch. He's got to be the best. So from Young Gotch, he becomes Karl Gotch because he ain't that young. And I think he wants to kind of get away from the Nazi associations of a name like Karl Krauser.
That's as soon as you said that and like his look and everything like that, I'm just like, God, I'm just immediately pictured the uniform and the salute.
It's wild to think that there was a time in America where people didn't like Nazis. You remember that? People didn't like Nazis.
Oh, thank God.
Your grandparents? And that was a big thing back then, though, right? It was like to have a wrestling Nazi. That was huge. There were so many wrestling Nazis. They were usually like,
it's tough to think about.
They were usually like Jack Atkinson from Indiana. You know what I mean? Or like a French Canadian guy. The accent was close enough in Texas. They didn't know the difference.
Yeah.
So there were like a lot of that. I feel like Karl, having kind of experienced it, maybe didn't appreciate that. Kind of again, Karl didn't really go in for the making as much money as he could thing.
Yeah.
So he certainly wasn't going to pretend to be a goddamn Nazi.
So what do you think his motivation, and maybe you're going to get to this later, so apologize if I'm jumping the gun, but does he just want to wrestle? Like, you've been to Olympia, like you spent 6-7 years in the snake pit. If money and the show aren't really driving him, what do you think is really? Is it just trying to make a living, or? I
think a lot of it's just like making a living the best way he can, and I think he wants like
prestige.
I think he wants prestige more than anything, but you can want prestige. What you need is money. You know what I mean? So he's trying. I think there's probably a large part of him that's really trying to be cool,
right?
And I think we all know that feeling of like knowing like the right answer, the right thing to do to end this argument with your partner is to just say you're sorry, but you can't. That's
yelling at you in the back.
I think that's kind of what he's going through right here. We all know it, Jimmy. It's a big part of life. We all know it. Where it's like, you should throw the fight. You'll get a lot more money if you throw the fight.
Yeah. But that little ego, that
not everybody can live that jockey life.
Yeah.
Some people really want to win and they don't want to be embarrassed. And I think for him, a lot of the times he would lose to someone he thought was a good wrestler.
Yeah.
He would lose to Luthez because he thought Luthez was pretty good, but he didn't want to lose to Buddy Rogers. And that becomes a problem because Buddy Rogers is kind of the world champion. And I say kind of for reasons we don't need to get into. There's a lot of controversy around this time around who the world champion is. Is it Luthez, the last of the respectable catch wrestlers? Or is it Buddy Rogers, the new breed, the blonde Hollywood fashion plate?
And is this because of two different organizations? Like, do they have two different belts, but which is the real belt? Or
it's like one organization that can't agree.
Oh wow, that's even what?
So half of the promoters are saying the money's with Buddy Rogers.
Yeah.
So Buddy Rogers is our champ.
Yeah.
And the other half of the promoters are saying the money is with legitimacy.
So
we're going to have Luthez as champ. So of course, the very showman-oriented Buddy Rogers gets into some sort of conflict with Karl Gotch. who A, is friends with Thez, and B, does not suffer a fool.
Yeah.
And he, I think he breaks his arm. He slaps him around
in the ring, or is this like
this is in the locker room?
In the locker room.
Yeah, it's like he gets another guy to watch the door, and he goes in, and he slaps Buddy Rogers around for a little while, and he hasn't really he's not a proven draw in a lot of ways. He's been given opportunities at this point. Karl Gotch has had versions of the World Championship.
Okay,
he's been promoted as a top draw in Columbus and San Francisco, and he's not making good gates. You know what I mean? He's not bringing a lot of money because he's not captivating. He's not a captivating wrestler for the everyday person. He's not doing a lot of slam bang. He's doing a lot of technical stuff. He's not giving his opponent much. He's kind of, you know what I mean? He's not making it a very compelling, dramatic fight.
And he's not great on the mic or anything like that.
And he can't talk. You can't really put him on like a radio program or anything like that. So he gets pretty much blackballed for doing this to Buddy Rogers in America. His American days are pretty limited because not only does he already have this reputation as a braggart and a bully and someone who would take advantage of you if he could. Now he beat up the world champ.
Right.
You know what I mean? You went in to try to prove you're a tough guy, so you went after the money. You can't play with the money. You can beat up a young guy or a lower card guy. You get away with it. You can't beat up the champ. You can't beat up Hulk Hogan.
Yeah. You can't beat up the money. Yeah.
So then he starts traveling again. He's out of America. He's in Australia. He's pretty successful in Australia. He goes to Japan for the first time.
Oh, I would have assumed someone with this style would have been in Japan already.
Well, Japan at the time is different. It's the way that people think about Japanese wrestling now. Is that it is like the super legitimate style, but that comes because of Karl Gotch. It's not there before Karl Gotch. Professional wrestling in Japan at this time, even though they have Kimura and stuff, is still very largely a narrative-driven show style wrestling.
It's a little closer to even like the Mexican like luchador kind of.
No,
not quite.
Straight American.
Okay.
Honestly, straight American. Straight American tag team matches are really big.
Okay.
The first big wrestling match in Japan is a tag team match. Been with two Canadians who are pretending to be American and two Japanese guys. And the Japanese guys and the American guys, it's you know, the bomb was dropped 10 years ago.
Fuck.
You know what I mean? So
that's crazy to think about.
And America basically has Japan under its thumb, right? Like
who wins the match?
The Japanese, maybe?
I hope so, but yeah. Okay.
I actually don't remember. I'm assuming the Japanese.
Let's go with Japanese.
That's a better way to get people back.
Yep. So
he's going to Japan, and in Japan they appreciate it.
Okay.
Because even though wrestling is quite showy there, the difference, like in America at this point, no one's ever really in their real life, unless they've been to see a Frank Gotch wrestle. You don't know a lot. Like Al Snow, who is a great trainer, always said that like the most important moves in wrestling are the punch, the kick, and the headlock because everyone's been in them. So when you're in that situation, when you see someone get punched, kicked, put in a headlock, you can relate to it. You can't really relate to a Fujiwara armbar.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
I can, but yeah.
I can, but most people can't. So that's who you're trying to get. But in Japan, martial arts is crazy prevalent.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people have trained in judo, in jiu-jitsu, all these different things. So karate. There's a lot more room, I think, for people to appreciate like legitimate skill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he gets over there. He does go back to America very briefly in the early 70s. But in the major kind of centers of wrestling at the time, where things were a little more open to someone who had been blackballed. So people that were kind of outside, like he goes to the WWF, which is the WWE today, because the WWF is not a part of the same organization that Buddy Rogers was in at the time. You know what I mean? It's a different governing body.
Right, that have this part, but they were huge.
Yeah, New York is its own thing.
Right. Okay.
So he goes there, wins the tag belts. with Rene Goulet, another European, because that's real simple. Here's a couple of Europeans. Still not a draw, though.
Okay.
You know what I mean? He adds legitimacy to a card, but you don't put him on top.
And this is fascinating to be called the god of wrestling,
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the thing about being called the god of wrestling, he's called the god of wrestling in Japan.
Okay. Right.
You know what I mean? Because in Japan, like everything has a kind of like a god.
It's true.
There's
true.
There's a little deity for everything,
absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
And he does transform Japanese wrestling, and he does it pretty much immediately after this because he goes to train for Antonio Inoki's new promotion.
Okay.
So Antonio Inoki, who we're going to get into next week,
I was going to ask.
We're gonna have a good talk about Inoki and Ali, which Karl Gotch was a part of.
Sick.
Inoki is kind of like the second generation of Japanese pro wrestlers, and he and another guy named Giant Shohei Baba are the heir apparents to the WWE of Japan at the time.
Okay.
But there's a lot of conflict and a lot of impatience from Inoki, where Inoki is like, he doesn't want to, he's done with this. Make me the star now.
Okay.
So he gets fired and he starts his own promotion called New Japan Pro Wrestling, which is still around today.
Jesus.
The biggest professional wrestling promotion in Japan.
Still run by Inoki?
No. Inoki's an interesting cat. We'll get into that. He's dead now, but it hasn't been run by Inoki for a long time. It's going to be really fun. And he worked and trained with Gotch earlier in the late 60s.
Okay.
Was extremely impressed by him. And Inoki also grew up in Brazil. Oh. He was Japanese, but his family moved to Brazil.
And there is like a big population of Japanese in Brazil, right? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And there's also a huge culture of grappling.
Absolutely.
Vale Tudo and
sports.
Stuff. You know what I mean?
Of course.
So I think he was really appreciative of Karl Gotch's skill.
Okay.
And he liked his style. And Inoki really wanted, like Inoki's whole goal in life was to make people take wrestling seriously as a sport and make wrestlers look tough. He wanted it he changed the direction of wrestling even before Gotch got there, but he changed it really, I shouldn't say he changed it before Gotch got there. He is just as responsible as Gotch for doing it, for changing the direction of wrestling. But everything he learned to change it came from Gotch.
And Gotch was kind of like the face of it as well. Like he was kind of pushing what Gotch was, he was kind of supporting what Gotch was pushing.
I would say he used Gotch in the same way that, like, you know, like the Queen of England? A lot of monarchy.
Where you go?
Jimmy, you know. Like a lot of monarchies, like they trace their lineage back to like the pharaohs.
Okay.
Like if you look at the lineage of the House of Windsor, it goes back to the pharaohs. Does it really? No. But what they're doing is they're like using the legitimate or like the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman,
right,
but they use the term the Holy Roman Empire to take the authority of ancient Rome, or Tsar, the Russian Tsar meant Caesar. Because Caesar is a term of power. So I think using Gotch in the sense is to say that, like, here's our legitimacy. This guy, Karl Gotch? Is this guy, Billy Robinson? This is the lineage of what we do, which is why you should take us seriously, because we're bad motherfuckers.
Different than some of the rap in the States at this time where they're more performers, not necessarily just bad motherfuckers.
Exactly. It doesn't work over there because they've got their own thing and they've got their own lineage.
Right.
You know what I mean? Right, even though there's plenty of lineage to be found in Japan for jiu-jitsu, judo, like all these other martial arts, wrestling is kind of a new thing. This professional wrestling thing is kind of new. Puroresu. So they're tracing it back to Gotch, to Wigan. That's where they get their legitimacy.
Of course.
Yeah.
Side question again. Do you know, in Japan, is it become more, like, do they have, like, wrestling in college in Japan and stuff like that? Like, is wrestling?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They have representatives at the Olympics and stuff. And a lot of Japanese professional wrestlers, were Olympic judokas, or they were big-time sumo wrestlers, or they were, freestyle Greco-Roman wrestlers in the Olympics. Riki Choshu, who was a big star, who we'll talk about briefly at some point, I'm sure. Lots of guys.
Thanks.
So he brings Karl Gotch over, Antonio Inoki, pronouns pal. Antonio Inoki starts this new promotion, brings Karl Gotch over to wrestle him in the main event of the first show, and installs him as the head trainer of the dojo.
Yeah.
And he is doing this because he wants his young boys, as they call them in Japan, his trainees, his wrestlers, to not only have the knowledge that can be passed down from Karl Gotch as a wrestler, as a hooker, as a shooter.
Yeah.
They want him to have his conditioning, because Karl Gotch's conditioning is considered like the most rigorous, brutal, like you want to puke and get back on the mat, okay?
And this is in what is possibly the most brutal sport in the world. You're talking about the high standard in one of the most absolutely physically demanding things that a human being can do.
Yeah, exactly. And making it harder because you're going to have to do 1,000 squats. Like Billy Robinson wasn't doing 1,000 squats, I promise you.
Yeah.
Maybe, he was a very well-conditioned young man. And as far as actual conditioning, having gas in the tank, he kept that even as he got quite a bit bigger.
Cool.
You know what I mean? But he couldn't hold a candle to Gotch as far as conditioning. Nobody could. It's not an insult to say that you weren't as well conditioned as Karl Gotch. So he's training all these guys and gaining a reputation in Japan as a very dangerous and knowledgeable guy. Billy Robinson talks about how when Billy went in to train, he couldn't really get through the Japanese students, and Karl Gotch was like, "You got to hurt them. Hurt one of them real bad, and they'll all listen." Because that was Karl Gotch's instinct. He would go in, he'd go break a guy's leg, and then
everyone's paying attention.
Everyone paid attention from now on. They respected him. Because a weird thing about Japanese culture too is, as we talked about with the Ricky Dozan and Kimura fight that turned into a shoot,
right?
You know what I mean? It's like, even though Ricky Dozan was clearly just blindsiding a man, the Japanese respected him for doing it.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, you took what you wanted.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So in this scenario, I think for Karl Gotch, it's like, well, they're going to respect the fact that I will hurt them, that I'm capable of it, and that I'm willing to do it.
And that does match up, I think, a little bit better, especially in this context, with the more Japanese mentality, as opposed to something in like...
Oh, yeah. In America, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Especially like being sneaky about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like being like kind of underhanded. That, like, there's so much Western.
You took our freedom.
Yeah. It's just a Western, like, and I don't mean Western as in like the Western Hemisphere. I mean like the Wild West.
Yeah.
Kind of like there's a white hat and a black hat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're honorable or you're not, which is not how fights work. But, you know. So it didn't really work for Gotch. But it worked for Gotch in Japan. He, around this time, late 70s, early 80s, starts being referred to as the god of wrestling.
Yeah, that's when
people start to realize, like, nobody can take this guy.
Yeah.
Nobody holds a candle to Karl Gotch. And he is there for the birth of mixed martial arts because he actually corners Antonio Inoki in his fight with Muhammad Ali.
Jesus.
And they come back, and that fight's an embarrassment. We'll get to that next week.
Yeah.
But they come back, and that fight really is important to the Japanese because Inoki didn't lose. Even if it was just a draw in the most boring fight in the history of fights.
It was against the greatest.
It was against the greatest fighter in the world, the most famous athlete on the face of the planet.
Yep.
And he came back having technically, I think he got scored more points in the fight and then was docked them for like fouls, basically. So he kind of outscored Muhammad Ali and then was docked them for fouls, which is politics. Not that there was a winner in any way. No one did anything.
No one won in that fight.
No one could win. They designed it so that nobody could win.
Right.
So this kind of idea of and Inoki's really trying to show like his Bushido, his fighting spirit at this point. And he's bringing in judo champions, sambo champions, amateur wrestling champions, boxers. He fights Leon Spinks at one point in the 80s. So his thing becomes he's going to be the martial arts champion of the world. These are not legitimate fights. He's bringing them in to lose to him.
But this is why you kind of said it might be the godfather of MMA, because he is really starting to branch.
He's trying to make wrestling look like wrestling.
But by incorporating some of these other elements into it.
By incorporating the idea that wrestling is the strongest martial art.
Okay, right.
So these are works.
Yes.
The Ali fight isn't a work.
Ish.
It's not. It's no one gave up on purpose. It was they worked themselves into a work.
I'm so confused.
It's we'll good. I'm going to look into that next week. So he's creating this atmosphere, and then Inoki starts like a vitamin supplement company, and he's laundering funds, and he's siphoning funds, rather, I should say, from New Japan Pro Wrestling into this other company he's got.
Because vitamins don't sell.
Because vitamins don't sell unless, I don't know. Alex Jones sold a shit ton of them.
Except for AG1. AG1 is a shit.
AG1's pretty good.
I've been doing it for like a year now, if you ever want to talk.
I'm yet to see any kooks related to it.
Yeah.
The president of New Japan Pro Wrestling, Hisashi Shinma, takes the fall for him. All right.
Very Japanese.
He's a good soldier.
Yes.
He takes the fall. And he takes a few of the athletes with him, the ones that are really versed in Karl Gotch's wrestling style. He takes the best shooters in the company, and they form a new company called the UWF, the Ultimate Wrestling Federation.
Okay.
And it's debatable as to whether Inoki really had much to do with it or not, but I would say Inoki had a lot to do with it.
Okay.
I think it was Inoki branching out to try
to have like a sister company to a little competition, like a little,
and also to see if it works.
Oh,
let's see if we remove almost all of the narrative.
Oh, okay.
Let's see how it works. And he's got a lot of guys on the roster that are really sick of the way professional wrestling is handled. Guys like Akira Maeda, Satoru Sama, Tiger Mask, Fujiwara.
Right.
A lot of these guys are sick of the way pro wrestling works. So they want it to be more like watching Antonio Inoki and Karl Gotch have a shoot match.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They want it to look more legitimate. They want to be that badass. They want to take pride in it in a way that is kind of hard with disqualifications and narratives and steel chairs.
Yeah.
So they bring a bunch of these guys out. They start this new promotion. It doesn't work very long. Mm-hmm. We're going to do an episode on the UWF, so I'm not going to go deep into it right now. But these are all Gotch students. Yeah. Gotch goes and becomes their trainer. He leaves New Japan, becomes the trainer of the UWF.
So it's literally the first organization, he builds all of that up. This splits off to this other one. He's going to train all those other guys.
All these guys.
His style.
And they're more his guys.
Yeah.
It's all of the guys that he thought were worthwhile.
Okay.
Basically are the ones that form this, except for Inoki and Fujinami, who stay in New Japan, of course. And he seems to really love Fujinami, which I've never thought of Tatsumi Fujinami which means nothing to you, either of you.
Sorry, no.
But I never thought of him as like a great shooter, but apparently Karl Gotch is hell of a shooter. I'm not going to argue with him. God damn it, pal. Don't hold in your sneezes, man. So this doesn't last long.
A couple years.
There's a lot of infighting, a lot of ego, and they all end up going back to New Japan, and then they all end up leaving and doing their own thing. So from UWF, you get Pro Wrestling Fujiwara Gomai, which is Fujiwara's promotion, which is actually a little further down the road. You've got Satoru Sayama, who starts Shudo.
Oh, okay.
Akira Maeda, who starts Pro Wrestling Fighting Network Rings. Nobuhiko Takada, who starts UWFI, and then Pride.
Oh, so this is almost like a PayPal thing where they kind of started. They did this thing.
All these evil geniuses went out and started their own things.
Okay.
Yeah. Funaki and Suzuki trained under Gotch. They go to start Pancrase.
Right.
So like every one of the foundational MMA pioneers in Japan
have been trained by Karl.
With Karl Gotch.
Right.
He's got them all, right? And it becomes really weird because he seems to hate all of them.
He seems to be like a kind of angry person.
Yeah, he's definitely like an angry, bitter guy. I think he's an itinerant shit talker, which I understand because I love talking shit. I hate it about myself, but I like it. It's like I black out and I wake up and I'm bad mouthing someone. You know what I mean? I don't even have to mean it. I might really like him, but I grew up in a trailer park and we talked shit. That's what we did. We were always antagonizing each other.
You should see me and Blake have gotten in some text wars a couple of times drunk at 3 a.m. I read it the next morning. Like, Jesus.
We can't play cards together no more. We're not playing cards. So he's always kind of shooting the shit and just bad mouthing people. He's especially in that Jake Shannon interview right before his death. He has very few things to say about anyone that's positive, and he usually follows up a positive remark with something quite demeaning.
Right.
Talking, like, Fujiwara, who was getting a lot of movie roles in the 90s and 2000s. He's like, he's got like one line. He's nothing. It's like Fujiwara wrote a book about how great Karl Gotch was and made a documentary about how much he loved and appreciated Karl Gotch. And he couldn't get anything.
Not a single nice word.
Couldn't get a damn thing from him. And that was just kind of, he's like, Luthez wasn't that great. Oh, he wasn't that great. Oh, he couldn't wrestle anybody. What's his quote about BJJ? All these Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys are just old whores waiting for you to come, like, enter them or something like that. Because of the way they lay on their backs, like their guard position. He's just like, and there's so many stories about him. Just like, you give him your arm because that's what you do in pro wrestling or whatever. Yeah, maybe he asks you, give me your arm. And then he just like puts you in a sugar hold, or he sprains your wrist. He'll take advantage of people. He is a bully. Like, he's not a very pleasant guy to be around most of the time. And that is a part of his legacy. But the main part of his legacy is that he changed professional wrestling and he changed the face of mixed martial arts, if not like kind of invented it. If he didn't invent, he inspired it. He inspired all these pro wrestlers to go out and say, we need to get back on the map as tough guys. We need to get back on the map as capable and competent competitors. Too many C's in a row. I hated that. Which is, and you train them for it.
Which is fascinating then, because if you think about it, because again, I did striking martial arts first. Grappling has come much later. I mean, I'm absolutely in love with it, but there is something a little bit different about it. That there is something inherently non-showy about it. Like there's when you punch someone, when you just see someone get knocked out. I mean, there's few things that are as visually striking as appealing as just getting someone just bing, stiff and out. But it's just fascinating that if what you're saying. The UFC got started because the Gracies were trying to prove their grappling, and a lot of the other Shudo, Pride, all started because other grapplers were really trying to legitimize their grappling style. I mean, that's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, and that's what all it comes down to. And they're trying to this is kind of different. I guess it's not that different because it's not like the Gracies weren't doing it for money.
Of course
they're doing it for money. But like with pro wrestling, everything has to be reflected back to the idea that like what this is really about, in theory,
is the show.
What it should be is about improving your gait. It's about getting the box office. And certain things like the UWFI, which is the one that like kind of Takada led, the reborn UWF of Karl Gotch's day.
Okay.
They're selling out the Tokyo Dome. They're getting 60,000 people.
And this is like the 90s?
This is the 90s. They're reinventing pro wrestling. Like, it is a straight reinvention that has to be drawn back to Karl Gotch and Antonio Inoki.
Wow.
Like, everything about Japanese wrestling changes. And then it gets really bad. Like, it goes too far.
Okay.
It becomes unwatchable. It almost kills the business in Japan at one point because it's just...
Because there's no work.
Not fun anymore.
Yeah.
And no Gary Goodridge can't lose to that guy. Bob Sapp isn't going to lose to that guy. Why'd you make it look? But why'd you try to make it look like a real fight then?
Yeah.
If we can buy Brock Lesnar losing a pro wrestling match to Triple H.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
They're both big guys. It's pro wrestling. You can't buy Brock Lesnar losing a match that's all ground and pound and submissions and strikes and is made to look like a real fight. You can't watch Triple H beat Brock Lesnar at that because it's silly now. Yeah. It's actually more silly to make it look like a real fight. So
it's such a weird line, right? Like sometimes the work is so much more acceptable than
because you just know it's a work. You're supposed to know it's a work. We're all in this together. It's a work.
It's like the uncanny valley, right? It's like there's a certain point where it's just like it's got to be either real or very fake, and there's this when you get too close to the in between, it gets bizarre.
There's an uncanny valley of ass whoopings.
That's gonna coin that.
And sometimes that face carved into the tree just isn't working for you. So we're gonna have to edit some of this silence out. That's a lot of dead air I just put in there.
No, I think that was.
So yeah, that would be Karl's legacy. He's a man who reinvented wrestling, who for a long time, in the same way that Robinson or Roy Wood did, kept catch wrestling alive, and it became a hybrid in the sense that like people kind of stopped calling it catch wrestling. It just became pro wrestling in Japan.
Yeah,
this is pro wrestling. Sakuraba, when he came down to fight in Pride, his discipline was pro wrestling. That's what it would
say. Okay.
You know what I mean? But that's not what it was. It's catch wrestling.
Yeah.
If it was pro wrestling, he would have finished his matches with a fucking pile driver. Or, a clothesline. That's not what happened. He was using catch wrestling, but it became kind of pro wrestling there. But it's still, it's like jazz and R&B, or New Orleans jazz and R&B. It might change the name. Fundamentally, at some point it was the same, and then the evolution continues.
Yeah, a spectrum.
And I think you have to also kind of recognize that his legacy is that he was a bully.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And he was a bully. He was an itinerant shit talker. He was a nonstop bully. I think he had probably some leanings we wouldn't agree with in today's society. He could not stop calling the Japanese people he knew Japs. He wouldn't stop.
Lived
there for years. Married one.
Wow.
Married a Japanese woman. Trained so many of them. And was given so much respect. And he still had to do this. In an interview I listened to with him, so his daughter married a Japanese wrestler who then died quite young. And he was talking about how he wasn't a very good wrestler. He's, you know what I mean? He's kind of talking shit about his dead son-in-law. And
it is kind of amazing that it doesn't matter how many awards or like how successful technically your life can be, you can still be a miserable.
Yeah,
it sounds like he hated his life to a degree. It sounds like he was just kind of miserable.
He was, yeah, and it really seems that way. And it seemed like for the most part, he lived a really good life.
Right, on the outside.
Maybe if he had stopped doing so many push-ups and eaten a couple more donuts, he'd have been a little happier.
Maybe give a couple more hugs, right?
Yeah. Maybe watch a film, stay home. Maybe you don't have to get on the bike today.
Watch some stand-up comedy.
Yeah, come on. I mean, he lived the end of his life, the last decade or maybe two of his life in Tampa, just living in the sun, like living the ultimate retirement
like a little
dream,
yeah.
You know what I mean? And he still was just bitter, just a bitter guy. And people say a lot of people are bitter, people talk about how Bret Hart's bitter. People... This guy's got them beat by a mile. Right? This dude is...
As you say, the respect that he got from people that is not the easiest thing to get respect out of. So he had the prestige. I mean, he had the fight. Like, if you have all that and you still suck at, I mean, does it?
Not only are you still bitter, you actively disrespect the people that put respect on your name. Like all the time. So yeah, I'm kind of glad I didn't meet him.
Yeah. I don't know.
God knows what he would have said about me. Oh man,
I would have grappled a lot of these people, but I would not have grappled Mr. Gotch. I don't think.
I mean,
Robinson, I would have loved to.
I don't think I would have grappled any of these guys.
I saw them.
I don't have very good insurance.
It's Canada.
So yeah, that's the story of the life of the pro wrestling god, Karl Gotch. What do you think? What are your final thoughts on old Gotch?
It's fascinating because, as you say, like there's some of these characters throughout history that. I mean, one of my definitions of a life well lived is if you would want somebody else to live your life. I'm trying to live my life in a way that, yeah, I can say to somebody else, yes, I really think that you should live my life. And it sounds like as much as he did some incredible things, no one wants to live that life.
No, or like, you know what? I would say I would love to live that life. I just don't want to live it with his brain.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
It's like
the brain was the problem.
Yeah, like, well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know what the first 20 years of this guy's life was like.
Who knows, right?
It might have been real goddamn bad. And maybe you don't recover from that.
Yeah.
Maybe your whole life you are living in the wings of your trauma.
Yeah. Well, they were both bad.
But also there's a difference between like having a sadness and having things you can't shake and just treating everyone in your life like shit.
Right. Right. I mean, to me, it seems like a kind of cautionary tale in terms of, and this is very Ken Wilber, but like I think to be successful or happy in life, it's about not necessarily being the absolute best at any one thing. It's about not sucking at any of the really important things in life. And it seems like as good as
I've been doing that for years, and I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine.
We can talk about this later. No, yeah. But no.
I think maybe like a little, and this again, it's a hard thing to say about anybody, but like maybe a little gratitude.
Yeah,
done some good. Just because you work really hard, and maybe you did accomplish everything on your own, which you didn't. Nobody ever has.
No,
but maybe you did. You could still just say thank you when someone compliments you.
Just a little, right?
I don't take a compliment very well.
No, you don't. You take a compliment like shit.
But I don't take a compliment and then call you a racial slur.
That is true. I can attest to that.
Never done that.
He's never done that.
Never done it. Call you all sorts of other shit. So yeah, that's kind of the way I feel about Gotch. Is that he contains multitudes. You know what I mean? As Walt Whitman would say, he contains multitudes. He is both capable of being an extremely important figure in the history of martial arts.
Yeah,
not just pro wrestling. Martial arts. He's got as much influence on martial arts history up until this point, if you include the 21st century, as anybody else. And he can also be like someone that you don't want anything to do with. I'm sure I don't want anything to do with Churchill, right? Mm-hmm. I probably would not like Winston Churchill. I don't agree with a lot of his policies. That does not mean that Winston Churchill isn't a hero who did very good work and very good things and may have saved the free world.
Yeah.
It can be both.
Yeah. You
know what I mean? And that's Karl Gotch is the exact same as Winston Churchill. You heard it here.
Same person.
Same guy.
A lot of push-ups.
I'm going to say just as important in the overall scheme of things.
No, but I mean that is incredible. That it is amazing how much impact one person can have. I think that's one thing when I'm just hearing this, right?
So much impact.
Because like I get to have a gym and get to do this for a living, and it is in part because of what this guy's done. And it's kind of a crazy thing. Like if it wasn't for someone doing something like that, bringing some of these things together and starting this kind of integration of all these different styles, MMA wouldn't be what it is.
It would be. There's a good chance it'd still be on rooftops and basements.
Fuck yeah.
You know what I mean? It'd still just be bare knuckle fighting.
Yeah.
Instead of this hugely organized, glossy product that can only be a couple of years away from a work. And then we're going to do the second Catch 22.
There it is.
Where we talk about how wrestling became fake again.
Again, it's gone right for it. The circle continues.
All right. Good? I think we're good. All right, gang. Sign off for today. We'll see you next week to talk about Antonio Inoki and Muhammad Ali's ill-fated shoot fight from 1976.
That's very tactfully put. Fun.